All right, so our next panel is going to focus on housing supports and community development in Pennsylvania. And I'm especially excited about this panel because when we started going down this journey of parent pathways, we knew housing is such a big component. And my background is in health and human services. I've had experience in the education system. But when we start talking about housing and housing credits and navigating the system, it's something that I know we all, and I speak from we all knowing that we have so many different representatives in the room from sectors. But for me personally, I know that safe, affordable housing is so crucial for programs like this to succeed. And not just programs, but when we're talking about social determinants and systems changes, housing really is important. And I know as a state, we've been trying with various agencies to have housing components and things that we're really trying to leverage. But I think that this panel is really going to provide some insight on how we as providers, as managed care organizations, as healthcare providers, as schools can look at some of the innovative ways that communities are developing and wrapping around families to support them through housing supports. So I'm really excited about this one, and I hope we can all, take away that knowledge as well. So I am going to turn it over to Beth Ellis, who is a housing specialist for the Department of Human Services, to lead the panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Caitlin. She just gave a great kickoff to this session in that at the Department of Human Services, we are working increasingly on these issues of the social determinants of health, and housing being such an important one of them. About 3 years ago, we initiated a housing strategy that is looking to improve the access for the populations we serve to have the affordable, accessible, integrated, and supportive housing that they desperately need to be healthy and successful in life. We looked at 3 populations to focus on with our strategy, one being those persons who are in institutionalized settings but could live in the community if offered the supports to do so and the housing. The second group being persons who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness, and the third being persons who are rent burdened. And we know that that is a significant part of the population in Pennsylvania right now with this increasing housing crisis that exists in all communities and in all counties. With that being said, Parent Pathways obviously dovetails very well into this housing strategy in trying to address the housing needs of these specialized populations. And so I would like to begin this session in hopes to invigorate your thinking about housing, educate you a bit on housing, as I know we're maybe a little underrepresented on the housing side today, and start making the connections you will need to create the housing piece of your Parent Pathways program. So I'd like to turn it over to the panel and have them introduce themselves and the work they do at their agencies, and also to begin to talk about their perspectives on why affordable housing is so important to underserved populations, particularly single parents in Pennsylvania. Rod, could you start?
I'm Rod Alcidonis. I'm the Executive Director for the Self-Determination Housing. Self-Determination Housing, we're a statewide organization that advocates to promote accessible housing for low-income individuals throughout the Commonwealth. I have been on the job for about 10 months now, so shortly it's going to be my first year. Before then, I was a civil rights litigator in Philadelphia, so I represented individuals with disabilities in civil rights disability employment matters. So that was a transition for me as it relates to coming across to housing. My perspective on housing is, as we look at any model that seeks to help single parents, when we think of a safe and affordable housing, I always like to put the layer of accessibility on that, because once you do that, you get the challenge of being able, you get the challenge of having a program that is responsive to other policy concerns. Housing has to be safe and affordable to everyone. The accessibility portion, at least my thinking on that of late has been, accessibility has other constraints where the location where the person's housing is located presents a challenge. And if not done carefully, you also expose yourselves to possibly negating other other policy considerations that are being implemented. One of which is the governor's initiative of Employment First as the policy of the Commonwealth. That is something that LNI, or in the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, has been working on in terms of making sure that parents and students of different types can be employed. So they go through vocational rehab and get the skills to become gainfully employed. So if you take a population like this, from a housing perspective, and you put them in a location where their housing is not accessible, you essentially would be undoing that policy. So you make them unemployable either because the location is not conducive to transportation, so they can't get to a school, they can't get to work. They have the skill set having been developed through the vocational rehab, but if they can't get access to transportation to get to a job interview, then you also will be undoing the policies that should be of common interest. So that's my perspective on why I think it's really crucial that any model looks at the population that has specific disability needs.
Good morning. Good morning still. My name is Bryce Moretsky. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning at the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. So my background is actually in housing and community development. I started after graduate school in Pittsburgh at a group called Action Housing, doing housing development projects at the neighborhood level. And from there, moved on to do more housing policy. I was Deputy Secretary at the Department of Community and Economic Development and did their legislative and policy work under Governor Rendell, and have been at PHFA for about 8 years doing their policy work there. PHFA is the primary financer of any housing that you are ultimately going to be thinking about. We manage the low-income housing tax credit program, which funds about 2,500 to 2,600 units of affordable housing a year through the tax credit program. We also manage the State Housing Trust Fund program, also known as the PHARE, P-H-A-R-E program, which is the newest sort of set of housing resources, about $25 million a year for housing and related supportive services that you may be thinking about as a part of this. We also run a variety of other programs related to Section 8 housing, contract administration for a variety of programs. But really, when you think about housing, and Pennsylvania has a dearth of about 350,000 units of affordable housing, we're the thing out there that's doing it, but it feels so small. And so we continue to try and push uphill to get more and more housing done. I think my perspective and our perspective on single parents and the housing issues is really to think about it as a two-generation sort of issue, and how do we develop housing, think about housing from that perspective. And so how do we make sure that the housing is located in places where there are good schools, in neighborhoods where there are strong neighborhoods, and where both the parent and the child can thrive. Access to food, access to outdoor recreation, access to transportation, access to employment. That's how we really think about housing, and we continue to try and prioritize housing initiatives that are addressing those kinds of strategies. We are able to prioritize housing for persons with disability through the tax credit program. We're able to, through the State Housing Trust Fund, we're able to do a variety of very creative initiatives, and this is the kind of creativity and the work that you guys have been doing over the past day or so that we would love to see in the State Housing Trust Fund program. So I'll leave that and pass it on to the next person.
Hello, my name is Lynette Praster, and I'm the director of the Center for Community Services at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, where Bryce also spent some time. Great. The primary programs that my center runs are the Weatherization Assistance Program, the Community Services Block Grant Program, and the Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program. And all three of those programs serve the low-income population in communities. And from our perspective, which I will talk a little later more specifically about the programs in relation to those questions, but our programs worry about where people live. Our community action agencies, there's 44 of them across the state. Many of them are here today, and I hope that all of you know your community action agency in your area. Their purpose is to ameliorate the causes and conditions of poverty. And we all know that safe, affordable housing are one of those measures that we have to take care of in order to bring people out of poverty. The Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program also addresses many of the issues that Bryce just talked about by utilizing public-private partnerships. The Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program is not a grant program. It's a public-private partnership. Businesses contribute to nonprofits who are doing a very specified project in their area. So I'll talk to you a little bit later about some of the simple ideas that we could use in Parent Pathways, a model, to be able to utilize that program.
My name is Leah Eppinger. I am the executive director of the Dauphin County Housing Authority. So I take their perspectives and I try to implement them in the most creative possible ways. So it is Housing Authority's job right now to take our traditional public housing, low income, affordable housing and change it, because we're not building public housing anymore. And we haven't for a very long time, which means the market is in need. And what we're trying to do is create opportunities in high opportunity areas. Where you don't want to put more affordable housing in places where school districts are failing, where there are no jobs for people to have, unless they're extremely highly educated. That's not going to benefit our low-income communities. So with, my authority alone has a wait list for public housing in Section 8 that goes beyond 3,000 households. That's not acceptable. In my world, as well as with everyone in here, we all know that the need is there, and it's really just become even more apparent that we need to get in front of it and use the tools that the state and the federal government has put out and create the connections with our communities, with our county governments, with our local governments, with private investors to build affordable housing literally everywhere and anywhere that we possibly can. Getting 3 affordable units in a market rate development in a high opportunity area right now is a win. And it doesn't sound like it because it's only 3, but those 3 families that live there, they're living on top of the world right now. So for us, it's making small strides to get into communities that will work with us, that will support us, and that will allow us to continue our mission, which is to create that affordable and safe housing for all of our community members.
In thinking about potential Parent Pathways models across the state, what would you identify as potential funding opportunities or types of affordable housing partners that you would encourage community members to consider working with to achieve their goals with Parent Pathways? Leah, would you care to start?
Sure. From our perspective, we spend a lot of time with our hand out, and I know a lot of people in this room probably do the same thing. But as far as we're concerned, we work a lot with PHFA. As Bryce mentioned, if it's getting built, it's probably in Pennsylvania. Their name is probably all over it. And that's okay. We know where the well is, and we keep going to it as long as it's still there. So for us, we are going to try to work with workforce agencies and large businesses in our communities to help seed some of these projects, because as many of you know, the gap funding between what we can get from PHFA and our investor is really the part where it generally fails, is creating that gap funding. So we're going to work with large organizations. So here in Dauphin County, we have Penn State Med Center, we have Pinnacle, UPMC, we have the Hershey Trust Entertainment organization, everything in Hershey. So these are all people that we're planning on partnering with to help create that gap funding, because they know that they need workforce housing. They need those parents to come to work every day, right? Because they can't run their organizations without employees from bottom to top. So if we make the case to them that they are in need, we can generally get their support and potentially their funding, which is usually more important, to make these projects happen. So, you know, I would say reach out to people who maybe in the past have said no, and it's probably the case, but continue to reach out to them. Make your case that these people are crucial to our communities, and without supporting them, their businesses won't run, because they're not going to be able to find people to do any of the jobs that they themselves may not want to do. Somebody has to do them. We've had many conversations in hospitals. You know, you need to serve the doctors all the way down to the person that empties, you know, the trauma rooms in the emergency room. You know, those people need to come to work every day. Without them, that hospital doesn't run. And without a place to live, those people can't come to work. So those are the partnerships we're trying to create, and those are the people that I would recommend reaching out to, even if they've said no in the past. Try again, try a different person, because someone will say yes.
I would like to steal from what some of the other panel speakers talked about earlier, and that being that it is going to take an entire community, an entire set of partnerships with all of us to make things happen. And quite frankly, that's where I feel that a lot of our very engaged community action agencies have been so successful, in that they have been catalysts for community work. So I would encourage that you, if you're not already in a partnership with them, because many of them conduct a lot of community development initiatives where they are doing various HUD counseling, they're accessing the PHFA resources to build housing, they are working with low-income families, they are working with people who are on the road to self-sufficiency. It's important to create those partnerships, and we do have to break down silos. I heard that said over and over again, and that's what we ask our agencies to do, is to break down those silos. I think that in the nonprofit world, it's not only our community action agencies, but all of the nonprofits across the state, across the country, have kind of been in a different kind of helping model, and we need to break that apart and come together to decide what the team of work should look like, who the partners are, what's going to be the most effective. So please reach out. If you don't know your agencies, please let me know. And if you don't work with them and need to, please let me know that too. Right, folks? I'll let you know if they need to be more communicative with you. We also encourage nonprofits and community action agencies to access the Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program, which I started to talk about earlier. As I listened to all of these examples of how Kentucky is doing their program, and Wilson College, and the ideas that have been generated about how things can happen, picture you being in the planning mode of trying to pull together all the resources for a family to access a Parent Pathways program. And you want to make sure that those washers and dryers get into their homes to assure that they, you know, can not have to go to the laundromat, that they can take care of their washing at home. The Neighborhood Assistance Program, build that business partnership to have those donated, because that business will then receive the tax credit for those washers and dryers. Okay, now that's very simple. It's a very simple-minded kind of thing, but our Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program just deals with every single possible measure on the road to self-sufficiency that you can think of. When we heard earlier about the emergency assistance fund that parents sometimes need because they get a flat tire and they can't get to class, well, gee, what if a lot of partners work together on approaching some businesses to donate to that fund for that year period, those 2 semesters? That would qualify under a neighborhood assistance tax credit program. Those are very simple examples, but the resource available in the neighborhood assistance tax credit program, it's endless possibilities. So we have a system of regional directors for DCED that will come out and help you think about those things. If you're not sure how it applies, would it apply, how does it apply, you can reach out to them, you can reach out to me and my staff, and we're going to be working very closely with the DHS staff on how to make things happen for you as you're developing your programs.
Okay, so partners, I would encourage you. I mean, so as I walked in at the end of the last presentation, I heard 2,500 units of local government in Pennsylvania. I would reach out to those thousands of units of local government. They are absolutely critical. I would start at sort of the county level and your county commissioners and county planning departments, county redevelopment authorities, sort of at the first level. But if you're in smaller communities, it may be the township supervisors, it may be borough supervisors, mayors, or city managers. They're going to be the people that can help connect you to some of the organizations that are that are sort of on the housing side of this world. And that, again, that includes Leah's work at in the housing authorities, redevelopment authorities. There are nonprofit community action agencies and community development corporations that are neighborhood-based and community-based that do a lot of not-for-profit housing as a part of the low-income housing tax credit program and other programs at PHFA. Private developers. There are many, many private developers who are working on affordable housing, and we can connect you. There is a whole developers council that PHFA helps and meets on a quarterly basis. We'd be happy to make some introductions through the Developers Council where a lot of those affordable housing private developers come together to talk about affordable housing needs. Banks and other lenders in your communities oftentimes are very interested in housing. They have a program called the Community Reinvestment Act, which is a requirement if they want to buy a bank or merge with a bank, they're required to make a certain amount of community investment. It oftentimes pairs nicely with things like the low-income housing tax credit program, but banks can be strong partners in these kinds of efforts. Universities and hospitals, as people have already mentioned, the eds and meds in smaller communities become strong partners, especially as you're thinking about these parent pathways programs. I think that's another group that should be thinking about. In terms of resources, from your perspective, I think in terms of the innovations that you're looking at in terms of programs around parent pathways and trying to develop sort of workforce housing for single parents, I would say the State Housing Trust Fund is probably also known as the FAIR, and I'm going to use the whole acronym. It's the Pennsylvania Housing Affordability and Rehabilitation Enhancement Fund, but yeah, right, exactly. So PHARE is the program. It's also known as the State Housing Trust Fund. It's funded. It was initially started in 2010, signed by Governor Rendell. It didn't have any money at that point. Beginning in about 2012, the Marcellus Shale, money from the Marcellus Shale drilling has come into the State Housing Trust Fund. It's only available in the 35 or 36, 37 counties where there's Marcellus Shale money, and it's about $7 million or so a year for those counties to address housing needs. And then beginning in 2015, Governor Wolf signed the most recent legislation that dedicated a portion of the realty transfer tax. So anytime any property is purchased, there's a portion of the realty transfer tax that you pay when you purchase a home or purchase a piece of property that comes to the state. The State Housing Trust Fund gets a portion of that, those funds, up to $25 million, and we're now at $25 million coming into the fund. That can be, we can use it for a variety of housing needs. We can do actually fund sort of construction of housing. We can fund rental assistance. So sort of if you've got people that are graduating from a program like this, and you could pair it with a moving to work sort of opportunity through Section 8 vouchers or other kinds of programs, you could do a rental assistance program through the State Housing Trust Fund as a way to help people, once they've graduated, find permanent housing. Still have the issue of finding the housing, which continues to be a struggle, but at least there's opportunities to help on the rental assistance side. We can provide, the State Housing Trust Fund can also be used for the supportive services that are linked to that housing. So if you're providing case management, daycare, transportation, first and last month, back bills on utility bills, we can pay for that. Those are the kinds of other supportive services that can be accessed through the State Housing Trust Fund. The challenge there is that we are already, in the last round, we've received about almost $70 million worth of requests for $25 million of resources. So it's not an easy pot to access. We are trying legislatively to get the pot increased, but know that it is pretty competitive. We received about 270 applications, and we'll probably fund less than half of that with the $25 million. The other one, as you're thinking about more sort of sophisticated, sort of moving up the complexity scale in terms of housing development projects, is the low-income housing tax credit program. It really does require a whole village and probably even a city to get these kinds of deals done. They are pretty complex deals. Leah can talk about the one she's trying to close right now by April 30th. But they often require sort of a partnership with a for-profit developer or a pretty sophisticated not-for-profit developer who really understands low-income housing and how to access the low-income housing tax credit program. We get about 80 to 100 applications a year at PHFA for that program. We have about $28 million of credits available to allocate, and we fund about a third of the projects that come in the door. Most projects have to come in 2 or 3 times, sometimes even more, before they are likely successful. And there are a variety of consultants that can help put together packages for that program. But it is the largest source of resources for affordable housing. So I'll stop there and we can talk more later.
I think the bottom line is you need to remember the acronym PHFA. I think it's, that's really your primary resource. I mean, I can amplify on that by suggesting when you think of partnership, you really need to think beyond the direct funding opportunities. I would suggest you look at your small nonprofit organizations that you work with and seek out their funding sources. And sometimes you might find that their work will complement any model that you seek to implement. I think it could be more challenging trying to do everything by yourself, or seeking funding to address each component of a model. But if you look at resources and partnerships and different alignment with other organizations, you might be able to indirectly tap into their funding. Again, from the sort of disability housing perspective, we are funded also by the Department of Community and Economic Development to do home modifications for individuals with disabilities. So essentially, their homes, we go into the home and modify it to make it accessible, either by changing the layout of a bathroom or steps. If you were to be in such a situation, we would complement your work by facilitating, by addressing this need without you having to seek funding to address accessible housing yourself. So I would really encourage that you go beyond the competitive aspect of the direct financing and look into partnerships in a more general sense.
Are there any examples you can give of innovative ways you have engaged or utilized your programs in the community that you think were especially creative and could be further developed and utilized through Parent Pathways? Does anyone want to take that?
I'll go first. I have the mic, so I'll go first. Yeah, one of the programs that SDHP, Self-Determination Housing, has that I've been most proud of when I came on board, we have a curriculum that the organization developed by the name of PREP, is the Prepared Renters Program. And I think when you look at housing, it's a curriculum that touches several components of housing, anywhere from assisting or facilitating a person's ability to become a prepared renters. And the population that you'll be dealing with, which are low-income single parents, they will have credit issues that would preclude them from accessing affordable housing. That's a resource at your disposal that would be available to you free of charge because DHS already funds it. And it's a fairly comprehensive way of looking at what is keeping someone outside of the housing realm and be able to help them become that type of renters. We also provide that even to housing providers in assisting them to understand that because someone has not a satisfactory past as it relates to being a prepared renter on paper, you should give them a chance because they've done this, they've done that. So that's one resource that I think can be incorporated into any model as by way of complementing your work.
Yeah, I would. We've recently funded some work that's going on around reentry for people coming out of prison who are coming back into the community, and both men and women. And housing continues to be a struggle, finding housing that's linked to the services for people re-entering the community. And so we've been able to, through the State Housing Trust Fund, fund a couple of innovative projects related to that, both on the supportive service side and on the housing side with some rental assistance. So it's sort of an interesting sort of new way of thinking about it. And again, it may be sort of a model thinking about as it replicates with the Parent Pathways work. Another effort that I found interesting and innovative was eviction prevention. We see a lot, one of the biggest challenges, especially in some of the more urban communities, is landlords being very aggressive about eviction and for a variety of reasons, some legitimate and some not legitimate. And so we've been able to fund some of the legal services groups across the Commonwealth to really help people who are facing eviction have legal representation, which has been very helpful in dealing with the eviction prevention issues. So those are just a couple of examples. We're also doing a lot of work around homelessness and trying to use the rapid rehousing model as a part of the homelessness, addressing homelessness across the Commonwealth.
In the Neighborhood Assistance Tax Credit Program, there's actually 5 components to it, and we will be giving you some information on it so you can read up on it. But one of the components is a long-term project. The other 4 components are 1-year type of resources that you can access. But the 5th component is a long-term neighborhood partnership program. And these are run by nonprofits in a particular place, a targeted area that has a specific problem and a specific number of projects and goals that they're trying to achieve with projected outcomes. And we have about 30 of these neighborhood partnership programs across the state, very heavily concentrated in the Southwest region. Most of them work on housing programs in their targeted areas, their targeted communities, which would mean that they're trying to access the variety of resources that are available that we've already talked about, but they're working in that public-private partnership with businesses, giving the donation, and they, as the nonprofit entity, conducting the project that's going on. So they're assuring that blight's removed, they're assuring that housing, affordable housing is being built or remodeled or available. They work on education programs, which is why this Parent Pathways model so much can fit into some of the efforts that are already existing neighborhood partnership programs are doing now and can spark some new ideas forthcoming. With our community action agencies, actually we have Bucks County Opportunity Council here who we didn't ask them to speak, but they run a very successful educational and self-sufficiency program utilizing technical schools. So, and they could talk more in detail about that, but they really are sort of like this mini, I think, Parent Pathways model that could be considered in terms of how can you assist folks in their neighborhoods, in their homes, in their current situation, be able to access what they need to access in education. So, and there are not only Bucks County, but several other agencies who have done a lot of successful educational models. So again, we can get you in contact with them to find out what's going on in your area.
So for us, we are trying to be innovative, but with a lot of the HUD regulations that we are required to comply with, it's sometimes difficult. So we run a fairly traditional family self-sufficiency program, FSS program, and what it allows us to do is to have people who are currently on the Section 8 program join the FSS program and set educational goals, family goals, and help save money to achieve them. So HUD provides a direct match of funding for anything that is saved by the Section 8 voucher holder. And they can disperse that money for educational purposes, for down payment on a future home. So currently we have 30 spots available in our program. We have filled 17 of them. We have 6 sort of applying right now, but we've gone beyond just the traditional, here's a flyer in your mail that you probably won't read because it looks like nothing, where our staff has really been going out and meeting with people one-on-one at their homes, as opposed to making them come to our office, which nobody likes to do, and on their time. You know, a lot of these people who want to be involved in these family self-sufficiency programs, they're maybe working third shift because that's what's available to them right now, and that's what works with their family, with childcare, with transportation. So we're trying to make it on their terms. So you tell us when it works for you, and we'll be there. So for us, it's really changing the way that we work at a normal 8 to 4, 8 to 5 schedule where we require everyone to come to our office, and sort of flipping that around and allowing and having us go to them. I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn more about our clients as well. We get to see where they live. We get to meet their families and not just the person who calls us when they need something. So I think it's a great opportunity. And I've done a couple of the interviews myself. I know my staff doesn't particularly love me at all times when I tell them they need to go out at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, but we're adapting and we're making it work, and I think we're going to start seeing a lot of really positive benefits. And when we hold a graduation ceremony and there's people there who have graduated out of this program, I think everyone will be. They will see their work come out, and I think that's the most important. And the other thing that we've done recently is we've partnered with the Capital Area Coalition on Homelessness, and I think Jen's somewhere in here. Oh, there she is. And we actually we sit on the Housing Committee, obviously, and we started a landlord mitigation fund, and that's to go back to some of the things that Rod talked about. And this mitigation fund allows landlords to feel more comfortable renting to someone without a traditional rental history, because it allows them to have some protection that if there were to be damages, that they could recoup some of those funds from this fund, as opposed to having to put out excess money beyond what a security deposit would cover. So I think that helps us sort of stabilize the landlord community, which is really important, but also expand it, because the word gets around that we're providing this opportunity, and then we can allow people who are coming out of prison, out of other institutions, and allow them to get back on their feet, even if they have no rental history or bad credit or some of the other things that would preclude them from renting. So this is just another backstop for those landlords to help them take a chance and give these people an opportunity to succeed on their own.
I think we have reached the end of our time for this panel. I wanted to thank the panelists for their excellent work, their insights, and their innovative ideas, and sharing those with you today. I know it may have seemed like a lot. We learned more acronyms than we wanted to. Thank you, FAIR. And we will be following up, as Tracy and Lynette indicated, with more information that actually gives you the path to finding some of these housing resources and organizations, so that you can start those making those connections that you will need to make. So with that, we'll end the panel. Thank you again.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you to all the panelists. I do want to point out a quick schedule change before folks start to break out into the regions. So our next speaker is going to be Maria Wilson from Family Scholar House. We originally had this at the end of the schedule, but thought it might be better to have Maria come up and speak before we all move around and shuffle around for our breakouts. So if folks can go ahead and stay where you're sitting right now as we invite Maria up. We're looking forward to hearing her story and how she's succeeded through the Family Scholar House program.